Welcome everybody to our RMI online research seminar. Today, this is actually the third seminar this semester, and we were very happy to have Eugenia Roska talking about sustainability in supply chain in poverty settings. We had Anne Gausdal talking about trust in innovation networks and how that is related to the management of such networks. And today, another very important topic, Hannah Trittin-Ulbrich, corporate digital responsibility. And we think this will be a great finish to our seminar series. I'm your kind of technical host today. I'm just going to be handing over in a moment to Melissa Kowalski. And of course, I welcome very warmly Hannah Trittin-Ulbrich, who will also be introduced by Melissa more properly. All I have to say at the beginning is the usual technical stuff, like we're recording this, and please keep your cameras on so it's nicely interactive, but your mics mute unless you're actually speaking yourself. And please use the chat function whenever you like to share comments, questions, or links to interesting websites, stuff like that. But given the group size, I think we can make it very interactive and that everybody can also just speak when they like to. So just raise your hand and then we'll recognize that you are about to speak. So, Hannah, we're very happy to have you. We've had a kind of a long-standing connection, but it's the first time you're giving a seminar in Witten or in the Witten context, since we're online and unfortunately not on campus here. And the connection is really via the topic of responsibility in general. Also, the Reinhard Mohn Institute is interested in responsibility, corporate responsibility at large. We've also historically, traditionally, since the chair here was founded in the 90s, not been interested in one specific aspect of responsibility, but we really also have roots in business ethics at large. So whether it's social responsibility or digital responsibility or whatever responsibility, it matters to us as an institute. Nevertheless, of course, digital responsibility and digital ethics are a new and exciting field that we would like to explore more. And we're very lucky to have you today to give us insights, because you're an expert. You've done much more work in this area than we have. So we look forward to your insights, and also just to the fact that we can exchange ideas here via this research seminar format. With that, I would like to hand over to Melissa, who's going to introduce you and then also chair the meeting in general. So I will shut up now and hand over to Melissa and just stay in the background for the technical matters. And maybe for some questions or comments, who knows? So thanks for being with us today, Hannah. Thank you for everybody else for joining, and over to Melissa now.
Thank you, Guido, and hello from my side as well to everyone. I am a first-year PhD student at the RMI, and actually my research interests align quite closely with the topic of digital responsibility. That's why I have the honor today to introduce our guest, and also later guide, as Guido already said, through the discussion a little bit. But now let's get to today's topic and guest. So we all know that digital technologies have many benefits. We can experience them every day on our phones, all the apps, but also just this video call. But with these technologies, there also come some downsides, because there are new ethical challenges arising, such as discrimination or surveillance or accountability issues, to name just a few. And now when organizations decide to deploy digital technologies, they are necessarily confronted with these ethical challenges. And the topic is very pressing, as new technologies are developed every day by the minute as we speak. And yet we know little about the practical experiences of organizations, how they deal with these ethical challenges and with these issues. And we know little about our understanding how responsibility or corporate social responsibility could evolve and include more digital challenges and turn maybe into corporate digital responsibility. And therefore, I am very happy to introduce today Hannah Trittin-Ulbrich as our guest, as she is one of the leading voices in these discussions. And she's an assistant professor for business administration, especially business ethics, at the Leuphana University in Lüneburg. And her research interests include corporate social responsibility in general. And they're you focus a little bit on CSR communication, if I'm right. Of course, responsibility in the digital age. Her research was published in internationally renowned journals, for example, the Journal of Business Ethics or the Journal Organization, where I think one of her latest articles about the unexpected dark sides of digitalization was published. And further, from October on, she will offer and lead a new education certificate on digital ethics for practitioners to also dive into the topic of digital responsibility. And yeah, that was my brief introduction. And now I'm very excited to hear about your projects and your findings so far. And I would hand over to you, Hannah, for your presentation.
Yes, thank you very much, Guido and Melissa, for this kind introduction. I'm very happy to present some of my work. I must say some, given the time span of 90 minutes, and I have basically been involved in the last year or so with multiple projects that basically relate to the questions of digitalization and responsibility. I can only make, a certain selection here, but I hopefully give you a broad, but that's my, let's say, I give you a glimpse in my own research, but also try to give you a broader overview about what I understand and what I consider as corporate digital responsibility and what this term is all about, given that this is a rather new topic. So thank you very much for having me. I suggest I jump right in. So maybe I can start with, let's see, sharing my screen and then basically telling you a little bit. Oh, sorry, that was the wrong. Let's see if I can now share the proper screen. Here we go. All right, so welcome everyone. As already Melissa told you, sorry, it's really hot in Lüneburg. It's about 30 degrees still, and I'm, sweating in my home office here. So bear with me if I'm, struggling through my presentation. This late during the day. So I'm asking the question, what is corporate digital responsibility? And I take this question very literal. So I really wanted to tell you a little bit about this term, how this discourse evolves currently in the German debate, particularly, and where we are at basically at this point. But before we do that, I would love to hear a little bit from you. And I created a Mentimeter for that matter. I would love to see who I'm talking to, who's active in the seminar, because that's always, in the digital sphere, very difficult to, let's say, decipher from the screen. So I would love you to start by scanning the QR code or using the menti.com and use the code then to get into our little Mentimeter. All right, I stopped sharing my screen here with the QR code, if that's all right. Oh, some of you are still screening, so go ahead. Okay. I will open my Mentimeter presentation and see. Okay. Let's see. All right, so now the technology is taking over here in my screen. I do have two monitors, but two presentations at once is even a challenge for that one. So here we go. So who are you? So mainly, oh, sorry. That's the right screen here. Okay, now you can see it, right? Okay, that's who you are. That's good to know. So some students, researchers, yes, great. And even business representatives and others. This is great because obviously this topic of corporate digital responsibility, and maybe we come back to our even group formation here in the group discussions later on. But I think this tells us something about corporate digital responsibility, and I come to that just in a little bit later. I have another question in the Mentimeter. You probably have seen it. And the question is, what topics do you associate with corporate digital responsibility? You should see the second screen or the second slide.
I am not yet. I don't know about everybody else. No?
Okay.
Ah, now it works for me, at least. For everyone else.
Okay.
Okay.
So the second question I have for you is, which topics do you associate with corporate digital responsibility? And I probably have to refresh my screen so that we can see the results. Ah, very good. All right. If you can hear water splashing in the background, my neighborhood kids having a blast. The beauty of home office. All right. Yeah, thanks so much for taking part. So what I can see from questioning you, what you associate with corporate digital responsibility are, oh, that's very interesting. Safety, a topic that is seemingly associated from many people of you with corporate digital responsibility. And I assume that you mean potentially data safety or safety that your personal data is secured. Maybe someone wants to allude of why they chose these terms or what they chose. I find the selection of cookies very interesting, which is a very specific technology rather than, let's say, an issue surrounding potentially the digital transformation. How come, or why is cookies, or why are cookies associated for you with corporate digital responsibility?
Just open your mic and you can speak.
Oh, yes. Yeah, absolutely. If you don't feel like it, it's also fine. I find it interesting. I will actually save this. This is also quite interesting for me because I present obviously this topic in various settings, and it would be interesting to see whether I can see differences. But it's overall, I think this really shows us that at least for many of us here, the context or the question of safety is something that we associate with corporate digital responsibility. So meaning that responsible business practices in the digital transformation should enhance the safety of individual users users per se. So I think this is very interesting, and I thank you very much for taking part. So I hope this is basically giving us a good link to what I'm presenting today. And I think it's very basic, or let's say very obvious that the digital transformation is a grand social challenge, and that means that the digital transformation as a grand challenge is a certain barrier that, you know, if we would remove it, it would have help us to advance as a society in large, right? So the problems that are associated with the digital transformation, at least in my opinion, are a grand challenge that we as society have to deal with and have to tackle. And obviously the effects of the digital transformation are global, they are societal, and that's why the digital transformation is a grand challenge. And why is like a grand challenge, a grand social challenge like the digital transformation, and you know, a topic for organizations and corporations in particular? Well, on the one hand, you could say, well, the digital transformation, that's, you know, that one social, let's say, transformation process that corporations benefit the most of. We know that the digital transformation enables corporations, you know, to gain efficiency, to make their processes more streamlined, to create, you know, explore completely new markets, develop, you know, data-based models and so forth. So they are definitely beneficiaries of the digital transformation. But at the same time, organizations, in particular corporations, play a huge role in tackling the or creating the grand social challenge of digital transformation. And obviously, when we think about scandals like Cambridge Analytics or you know, data leaks that are almost, you know, now on a daily basis, for example, as well as, you know, let's say data safety issues such as hacker attacks on hospitals. I just heard this morning, for example, in Lower Saxony, there is a hospital under attack. So hackers have basically hacked their IT system and actually collect ransom to, you know, open the IT infrastructure for the hospital again. So these kinds of issues are, you know, a social challenge, because obviously corporations have to make sure that our data is safe, but they also have to make sure that the processes that they develop in the digital transformation adhere to, you know, to social standards and, you know, democratic principles. And this is obviously a huge debate in Europe. So for example, there's recently been discussions and public discussions about a EU digital agenda to foster the trust in digital technologies. And here, Margrethe Vestager, who is basically, you know, at the forefront of fighting for a digital transformation that fosters trust in society and that helps European society to move forward. She suggests that trust is the main issue that has to be resolved in the next years around the digital transformation, and that means transparency has to be created of how technology works, and that means how basically decision or automated decision making is taking place. Second, she suggests that, you know, Europeans need to develop skills to understand how technologies actually shape their environment. Third, it is important that, you know, corporations, but also states create a solid and reliable infrastructure, which is an interesting point, especially in Germany, where you have, you know, still a lot of regions that are without proper fast internet access. And fourth, to create a trustful or to create trust in the digital transformation, we need a free and safe online environment where users can, you know, remain in control of who their data or who is using their data, and enable them to basically navigate the digital context. Obviously, the pandemic has been a catalyst for the digital transformation, as we are all now basically showcasing here with being in an online setting, which probably without the pandemic wouldn't have been happening this way. it's interesting, obviously, that the home office quota obviously has gone up and down throughout the pandemic. But I think we have a trend here that remains, at least for some companies, to stay. That means we already hear from large corporations like Siemens who try to, let's say, try out new innovative models of working from home, but also in more innovative workspaces. So I believe that this whole working from home and the digital office is basically remains to stay, at least for some of us and for some corporations. And this obviously creates also interesting questions with regards to the digital divide, because as I said, large companies like Siemens are basically wondering whether they can downsize a little bit their office space and create more virtual workspace. But at the same time, you can hear that especially small and medium-sized corporations see a huge challenge in first creating the infrastructure that is needed to use digitalization for their own gains, but also they lack a lot of knowledge as they report that their employees oftentimes are not really, let's say, knowledgeable about how to use digital technologies. And that obviously creates a digital divide in terms of, big companies and small companies. And I guess this is also quite an interesting question to explore in the future of how, digitalization creates these new digital divides that are, along dimensions such as space or size. Yeah, so the digital transformation as a grand social challenge obviously creates some unique challenges for corporations that want to act responsibly in the digital age. And one of these developments are basically quasi-monopolistic platforms that basically govern our digital infrastructures today. And obviously, the publicly debated cases such as, Facebook and Google, who basically govern more or less all our interactions. I don't know if you ever used a different search engine such as Google. If you do, please do so. But these intermediaries and these quasi-monopolistic intermediaries for our digital interactions cause a huge challenge because they're very intransparent. And that means if corporations rely on their services, they have a problem of telling their consumers, where does your data go, for example, right? So we see that there is a strong tendency for, very large corporations taking over or being in monopolistic positions in the digital transformation. And another question or another particular challenge that comes with the digitalization is also the changes in society, right? So we can see that the digitalization has created interesting phenomena such as, online firestorms. In Germany, we call them shitstorms. We see other grand social challenges such as hate speech to emerge, but also, things like fake reviews that basically distort review systems, for example, on Amazon. These are also indications for societal changes that come along digitalization. And I find it very interesting. Hartmut Rosa, the sociologist, for example, suggested that these hate speeches, basically, they are waves. He calls them resonance waves, basically, that these are basically waves of quickly advancing firestorms and reactions and negative reactions. And he actually suggests that combined the digitalization with the pandemic has increased these resonance waves, because he suggests that in the lockdown, when people had to stay at home, they didn't have, other stimulations. They were basically bored and they didn't get, distractions in their daily life. So they took basically all their rage, all their frustration online, and that created this even more, let's say, volatile digital interactions, which I find a very interesting observation, how also, various grand social challenges sort of interlink and reinforce each other. And then obviously, if you follow the news, we have specific technologies emerging, where we as society, and we, and with we I mean scholars, but also journalists, civil society members, and so forth. We're really not sure what to make out of these things, right? So, for example, artificial intelligence is a discourse in the media that is, hyped and, fostered by news that, for example, an artificial intelligence gets a seat in the boardroom. So basically making this a human, sort of a human-like interactive partner, also in the news perception, that basically tells us, I think, something about how we are also in, in terms of how we are understanding these kinds of technologies. And I would say, artificial intelligence here is a very broad term that, but it's interesting that it is a corporate, increasingly, a corporate practice and in technology that is applied. And obviously, we're not at this point where, an artificial intelligence is taking a seat in a boardroom in a German company, but we are sure seeing in the future, or in the near future, artificial intelligence being applied in the German context more and more. And I think that's something we as Germans are currently, especially if you follow the news, you can see that there's a lot of hesitation of what to make from this technology. But it also shows that, this technology is very advanced and potentially very complex. And a lot of us are just simply lacking the knowledge of understanding how that exactly works, and which AI we potentially need to fear and which maybe not. So that brings me, basically, all these challenges bring me to the topic of corporate digital responsibility. And I really took this very literal. I mean, I was looking at, or for this presentation, I really wanted to get a sense, or provide you with a sense of what the discourse on corporate digital responsibility is about. And I can basically summarize it. There are, out there are many definitions, and there's like no shared definition at this point. So I created basically my own. And I would say that corporate digital responsibility relates to activities that a corporation takes to live up to, social expectations of ethical, responsible, and sustainable development and application of technologies and the use of data. So this is a very broad definition, and I'm happy to discuss that with you. But in terms of what practitioners, and this is where the corporate digital responsibility term actually emerged from, what they talk about is usually all the things that you do on a voluntary basis to live up to social expectations with regards to the use of digital technologies and the use of data. So why do we need to talk about corporate digital responsibility? And that's quite easy, because obviously we, as business ethics scholars, we're interested in the questions of right and wrong in the digital transformation. And obviously we can see, with regards to the digital transformation, that the law is not the standard with if we want to ask, so what is right or what is good in the digital transformation? That is because usually the law, and we were probably all aware of this, is usually much slower than the technological advances that we observe. So one good example, for example, is the facial recognition technology, which has been developed for some time now. And Microsoft in 2018 actually called for public regulation, corporate responsibility, because the company realized that they were able to, produce products with facial recognition technology, but there was no public regulation, no state regulation of how this technology should be ideally be applied. And this is causing Microsoft, managers huge problems, because they knew this technology could, be very sophisticated, be applied to analyze faces, to recognize people in a large crowd of people. And they saw that there is a huge potential to survey, citizens, to use this to control masses and individual lives. And so they feared that, bringing this technology on the market would then create issues that wouldn't, comply with democratic principles. So the company actually called out for, more regulation on a product that they were able to develop. And this is basically one of the key issues that corporate digital responsibility tries to address, right? The things that go beyond what the law tells us what we should do. So there have been recent efforts from academia to basically tell us a little bit more of what corporate digital responsibility could mean. And one of these efforts I will present in the following is an adoption of this very famous Archie pyramid of corporate social responsibility. And this pyramid is basically extended by some authors, suggesting that, corporate digital responsibility is somehow an extension of what we know when we talk about corporate digital responsibility. That is the economic, the legal, the ethical, and the responsibilities from corporations. So on the bottom, basically, to fulfill your responsibilities as a responsible corporation in the digital transformation, you should ideally act profitable. So that's your main responsibility in terms of the economic dimension. And that would mean, in terms of the digital transformation, for example, to develop profitable business models that match the requirements of a digitalized society, meaning data-based business models, for example. Then you have the legal responsibility. So the corporation should act within the legal frameworks, meaning digital technologies and business models should follow the laws, for example, in Germany and in the EU, obviously, the data protection law, for example. And then we have the ethical responsibility, meaning that corporations should act within the society's norms and values. That means, for example, creating products that live up or that integrate principles such as privacy into the design already of certain products, or protect the privacy of their users beyond the legal requirements. And then we have the philanthropic responsibility, which means, contributing positively to society, which could, be realized, for example, by engaging in initiatives such as Data for Good, where you exchange or provide, data sets to use that for social purposes, or exchange the knowledge to enhance the knowledge of others around the digital transformation, and create digital innovations that, also address a social cause. So this is very I think it's a still useful framework in terms of thinking about what could be meant when we talk about digital responsibility. If we look more closely at the term corporate digital responsibility, we can say definitely this is a rather new and I would say to a certain degree also niched topic. As I already indicated, many corporations, especially in Germany, are still struggling with the digitalization per se, and meaning then, also asking questions about how to act responsibly in the digitalization is certainly a topic that is, on the agenda for some corporations, but definitely not for all, although I think it should, or it should be. So the term corporate digital responsibility, and I brought you here, just, this is not really scientific, but at least, gives you a good glimpse of sort of the popularity of the term. This is a picture from the Factiva database, where you can, check for terms and see how the press report is on a specific concept. And you can see here the press reports have been, let's say, rather marginal if you consider this. And I just put in corporate digital responsibility. I didn't put in, digital ethics. I just, focused very much on the term corporate digital responsibility. What we can see here is obviously that in 2021, the interest also in the media has grown in this concept. So I think this is also an interesting indication of whether we can see that this is a growing discourse in Germany, especially. Interestingly, Factiva told me that many or most of these press reports are from Germany. Some of them are actually from South Korea. It seems that there is a corporation that uses this term frequently in its reports. So it might be that this is a reason why there is also, this topic present in the South Korean press. And in terms of German developments, I can say that, some key events have been taking place since 2018. We have Katharina Barley, who was appointed in 2018 and said, we need a corporate, after corporate social responsibility, we basically need a corporate digital responsibility. And she initiated then the corporate digital responsibility initiative that started basically with a certain amount of or a small number of corporations engaging in what they called a learning platform of what corporate digital responsibility could mean for companies that are active in Germany and in Europe. But this initiative has been basically, I would say, the main driver in the last years for the discourse on corporate digital responsibility. But there have been recent developments, right? So for example, in the beginning of 2020, we had the first CDR magazine published. We can see that first industry-led frameworks are developed in terms of, what actually could be practices and guidelines for corporations who want to engage with that term. And then just this year there was an announcement that there will be a corporate digital responsibility award, and there's also initiated by the CDR initiative a first, let's say, very broad code of conduct emerging for CDR. So I think we can see that there's definitely sort of a field formation going on. And at this moment, we can see that there are, various state-based initiatives that drive this discourse around corporate digital responsibility. We can see that, a lot of civil society actors engage with the term. We have also, again, some industry-based frameworks that, try to support corporations to, make this a really practical concept that you can apply in the practice. And then we have these, let's say, symbolic initiatives such as awards that try to highlight best practices around this term corporate digital responsibility. When thinking about corporate digital responsibility, we may want to also ask, so who could take over responsibility, or where could corporate digital responsibility take place? And obviously, this is first and foremost a corporate topic. It seems to be, clear that corporations can engage with this term. For example, creating a vision or a mission statement that really tells us something about how they want to engage with digital technologies and what, how they use our data, for example, that they have a clear set of responsibilities and a reporting procedure in place. We also obviously know from CSR research that top management support is crucial for the success of any kind of responsibility initiative in corporations. So this is where corporate digital responsibility could take place, although it doesn't take place that much still, especially around, reporting, for example. Obviously, we can, even scale this down and say, okay, in corporate digital responsibility, managers have a huge impact on how, digital technologies are developed and applied. So responsible management could be a means to facilitate corporate digital responsibility, but also, ethical actions and decision-making competence that can and should be fostered amongst managers in order to make sure that corporate digital responsibility is actually lived within the corporations. Then a huge role plays politics, in my view, and this is also that, being in the field and in the discourse of corporate digital responsibility for some time, actually a lot of actors, including corporations, call for an active role of the political side of our society to engage with corporate digital responsibility, for example, by creating, on the one hand, innovation-friendly policies, but also on the other side, to ensure that there's a fair competition and also let's say a fair competitive field where everyone basically must play by the same rules. And this is something that especially for corporations, for German corporations, is crucial, because they see obviously that a lot of technological or technology driven corporations are not located in the US, not located in the EU or in Germany, and they fear that this is obviously for them a problem if they want to advance and safeguard their economic responsibility. So they call out for politics. And then obviously civil society plays a crucial role in making corporate digital responsibility take place, right? So not just educational wise, we have to teach our students, we should develop their competencies with regards to responsible management, not just in terms of digital transformation, but overall, I would say. But again, civil society plays a crucial role in knowledge exchange, in collaboration with corporations, but also obviously more, let's say, actively creating pressure and creating awareness and create criticism in order to make corporations move in the right direction, and to demonstrate that there is a societal demand for responsible business practice in the digital age. And then finally, and this is something that is potentially different to other topics around surrounding corporate digital or social responsibility, is the technology itself. So I think a big part of responsibility or taking over responsibility is taking place on the technological level. So the question is, how are actually technologies developed? And I think this is different to other kinds of CSR related topics, such as I don't know, the clothing industry, because a clothing piece of clothing, it cannot do another damage, so to speak, right? Obviously, we have the recycling issues and all these things, but it doesn't, you cannot take it out of one context and then use it in a different way, in a different context. And this is different with technologies. If you think about AI, right, or facial recognition, the example from Microsoft, you can see that in the hands of one actor, facial recognition helps us, to be easily identified and to make our life easier in terms of identification processes with, insurances, for example. But take that, facial recognition AI and give it to an oppressive regime, then you have the perfect machine for surveillance, and oppression. So I think this is something that we have to consider, that the technology itself is becoming, more or less an actor in itself, and has to, be developed closely in alliance with certain principles. And there need to be mechanisms of, accountability and transparency to make sure that these technologies are purposefully used for the right thing. So this is where I would say, in terms of corporate digital responsibility, we also depart a little bit from the context of corporate social responsibility. But I think we are, as I indicated with the timeline, we are very much in the early beginnings of the discourse on corporate digital responsibility. And I think that we will see like a sense-making process on a societal level in the years ahead. So I believe that what we associate with corporate digital responsibility also will evolve, and we will become more reflective on our, what we expect of these practices to be like. So having said that, I will, in the last couple of minutes of my presentation, before we engage in a discussion about the things that I said, I will briefly give you a glimpse of how I research corporate digital responsibility, and I present you the results, or let's say the overall perspectives on one of my projects that is sponsored by the Scholler Fellowship that I received last year. And it's also in cooperation with a project that's called Sustainability and Digitalization, a European Perspective, a project that colleagues of mine at the sustainability faculty at Leuphana University have developed, and which I was a project partner for. And we approached this this topic with regards to the question of, exploring how the discourse around digitalization more and more, interacts with the discourse on sustainability. And if you imagine, you have on the one side, this whole community that talks about digitalization, new digital business models, disruptive technologies and so forth. And then there is the other, let's say, bubble, research-wise, but also obviously in society, that talks a lot about sustainability, about, making corporate activities more sustainable, developing sustainable business models and so forth. And there's a growing debate about how basically these two discourses emerge and merge and come together. And this intersection between digitalization and sustainability is, amongst others, explored in the research around digital sustainable entrepreneurship. And in this project, we asked the question of how institutional entrepreneurs, that means people that want to make a change or develop further certain institutional settings, how do they actually use the discourse around corporate digital responsibility, and how is this a useful term or a discourse to develop new innovative and responsible digitalization practices? And we chose a qualitative and action-based research design. So that means that we had an interactive workshop with 8 individuals coming from different sectors. We had 3 representatives from the business sector, 3 from the public sector, and 2 from the governmental sector. And we actually put these people together. We did interviews with them and asked them, so what do you make out of this? How do you use this term corporate digital responsibility? Is the discourse useful for what you aim to achieve? And we found out that, corporate digital responsibility, although being a niche, was basically understood as something that is a moving target, but something that is very useful to bring together, the topic of sustainability and the topic of digitalization, and to carve out new opportunities. So our institutional entrepreneurs found that the CDR discourse helps them to create basically or engage in what they call collaborative responsibility, meaning that they basically see that the discourse brings together businesses, governmental agencies, and civil society. They found our workshop, for example, very much enlightening and very fruitful for their own work. So they definitely saw that there was, opportunity in this exchange, and also in the, collaborative nature that the term indicates to them. They also said that on the organizational level, the term is something that, or the discourse helps you to forge international or internal building or alliances within corporations. So for example, if you talk about corporate digital responsibility, people from the data protection office, but also from the sustainability office, want to be in the same room when the workshop takes place. So they really see that this is a, let's say, a bridging term and discourse that helps to bring together new alliances in firms. And then on the individual level, we find that institutional entrepreneurs found that the discourse helped them to sell their expertise to others, to make, their expertise known, and create sort of an, let's say, economic opportunity also for themselves. So they found overall that the discourse seems to help them regardless of which kind of sector they were in. And what we also found is that coming from different sectors, all these people seem to, come to, or they showcase basically 2 dimensions of corporate digital responsibility that they found quite useful. So for example, they said that corporate digital responsibility from a limited perspective is actually something that indicates that digital technologies are, tools that can be used in order to manage the corporate sustainability. And this is basically the limited approach to corporate digital responsibility. And that means that, they use the term CDR to initiate, for example, the introduction of blockchain, or discuss that at least in their corporations for supply chain management, but also, for example, to create further transparency about corporate processes. And there is this more, let's say, advanced view that these individuals proposed that actually relates to, digitalization or, digital transformation being a social phenomenon that is concerned with new issues that they haven't found an answer to, or that they are, worried about, such as the impact of social media on democracy, misinformation or disinformation, the digital well-being or social implications of new data-driven business models. So these are basically the two dimensions that they identify take place in the corporate digital responsibility discourse to them. And basically what our contributions are with this study, which is currently under review, so I cannot tell you whether our reviewers find this useful, but I hope. So we find that we can contribute to this emerging debate about digital sustainable entrepreneurship as a growing field of research, where we illustrate that the term corporate digital responsibility is basically emerging from a field-spanning entrepreneurial effort. We can see that there is a lot of support from the political side, but also businesses increasingly engage with it, and civil society. We can show that these institutional entrepreneurs try to carve out new opportunities, even within their businesses, but also new and engage in new practices. They also find that CDR is a useful spin-off, although it comes with a little bit of a danger, because obviously they say, well, CDR sounds very close to CSR, and oftentimes CSR, especially in the German context, is put equal basically with greenwashing, and then they say, well, there's a danger if we talk too much about CDR that this is sort of ridiculed as ethics washing. So they see that there is also a certain danger with using this discourse, but they overall find it useful to create a spin-off of an established concept that they can basically build up on. And then giving that corporate digital responsibility also in research is a growing debate. We have several publications in the past 2 years that have emerged. We definitely contribute to this by showcasing how especially German practitioners or German institutional entrepreneurs discursively construct CDR, what that means to them. Interestingly enough, for example, some of the studies I quote here draw on data from the American context. And if you look at the data tables, there's not just one word about corporate digital responsibility. I find that very interesting. So we really looked for, how do people actually construct this term corporate digital responsibility, and how do they construct the discourse around it? And then we identify through this practitioners-based and action-based approach, these two dimensions of CDR, which we find useful to emphasize, that there's, a dimension of digital sustainability, but also there's, a broader dimension that relates to CDR, meaning the general, changing social expectations and topics that people, associate with corporate conduct in the digital transformation. So this is one of the projects I said, and I'm, more than happy to share more about other research projects that I have if you're still interested, but, I don't want to overburden you with even further slides, and I think a depth of PowerPoint should be avoided at any cost today. So I will stop my presentation at this moment. I'm looking forward to your discussions and questions, and yeah, so that's it from my side.
Yeah, thank you, Hannah, for this first broad introduction, and then also for sharing your research findings. I have quite a list of questions actually, but I will happily give away the first question to somebody else if somebody has one. Then you can just unmute yourself or use the hand. That's both possible. Yeah, Tina.
Yeah, thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. And actually, you triggered a lot of thoughts and questions which came into my mind. And
that's
well,
good.
Yeah.
That's what I was aiming for.
Very good. So actually, at the beginning, when we used this Mentimeter tool, you asked us about what we associate with corporate digital responsibility. And then I just thought about how I think as user, I would expect corporations to, use my data reliably. And then it came into my mind, the relationship between trust and dependency, because, you know, sometimes I have some services, like, for example, WhatsApp, and in some terms, I would say I don't really trust WhatsApp to use my data reliably, but as my friends all use WhatsApp, I feel like, I depend on that service because I have to interact with it. And then there's maybe some services like, those sport badges where you can follow, I don't know, everything when you're doing your sports or you're running. And actually, I also don't trust these services, but in this, I have the feeling that I'm not depending so much on that service. And this is why I think that it always depends also on dependency. And in some cases, we as users, have to use those services, although maybe we don't trust them. And I asked myself whether maybe corporations who know about our dependency might engage in trust violation and maybe misuse our data. How do you think about those thoughts?
I think this is a great point. So dependency, I think, is a huge issue in the digital transformation. I'm not a trust expert, so I think I would give that question to Guido. But I would say that in general, I think this whole question of dependency, and I think this is something that I try to elude with a quasi-monopolistic corporation such as platforms. The users have no chance to use something else, right? So these platforms basically provide services that usually are disrupting industries, create services that are basically then very, the only ones that stand. Who can remember who had a StudiVZ account at this some time? Everyone has a Facebook account. I remember I had one, but after time, we can see that there are certain services basically taking up the forefront, and we are basically at a certain dependence with them and their services. You're completely right, and I think that's something that there's a strong legal component to that. I think, and this is not something necessarily that I would expect corporations to deal with, but rather politics, to make sure that there is a legal standard, there is a chance for people to opt out, but also to create a more fair, competitive environment where we can think about alternatives that are equally useful for us. But it's also, I guess, an individual question, but because I would say that we still have the choice, right? I mean, I think it's a lot about knowledge, but also awareness, and potentially also social awareness that has to develop over time. And I mean this by completely agreeing that once all my family is on WhatsApp and they have a family chat, it's really difficult for me to opt out and to say no, I'm not involved with you anymore. But I would say this is also a problem of general awareness that we have to come to, an awareness that this is actually something that we are trapped in, and we have to find solutions on how to solve these issues. Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. Then I think Leona has a question as well.
Yes, I do. Thank you, Hannah, for this interesting presentation. Really nice to hear a little bit more about this topic and also your work, of course. I was actually wondering, when listening to your, let's say, background on maybe we can call it governing digital technologies, whether you think that in this context of governing these technologies, we might also see new organizational forms arising. And my question comes from the fact that if we look at other, let's say, types of governance gaps, for example, as you mentioned, in the apparel industry, or just governing supply chains in general, we've seen this strong emergence on new organizational forms that are neither corporations or civil society only, but MSIs, where these are mixed, right? So do you think that these sort of new organizing forms will also come up in the context of digital technologies, or maybe you already know them. I would be curious about that.
Yeah, so I think I see a lot of interaction. That's what I think also the practitioners alluded to when they said there's sort of a collaborative responsibility element to CDR. What I haven't said at this point, I've conducted more than 30 interviews in the last half year with practitioners from the field using the term corporate digital responsibility, but that project is still in the making, so I didn't present it. But from what I got from the interviews is that several of them indicated that there is a much closer, that they found it a very fruitful collaborative effort. For example, the BMJV initiative is one where several indicated that this is really a learning platform, both for policymakers, but also for the corporations to learn about what could be issues that we have to address. And the code of conduct that they announced is if you look at it, it's really, let's say, broad and very vague, but I think it's a first effort to come to a more collective understanding of what are the issues that they need to govern and address. And I think, yes, you're right. I think there are ways of how these multiple sectors basically interact at this point. And I think this is where corporate digital responsibility as a concept is quite useful, because also this is coming from the history of CSR, obviously, that these initiatives exist in other sectors and industries, and I think a lot of people can then associate, okay, we can do this in this context as well. We can work together with policymakers and civil society actors. But I think it's very early to say whether this is any really trend that there's any development. I think, given that this initiative, for example, started in 2018, and there's barely any indication of that concept before 2018, I think it's very early to say. But I'm very interested in this, and this is actually what I'm looking at with these interviews, is sort of the birth of the governance of CDR, or through CDR in a way. I can also tell you, it's because the Scheller Stiftung founded this research. When I applied for that funding, I said, we can see a lot of consumers ask for ethics management with digital, in regards to digital technologies. And I want to see what corporations do inside, right? So what are the processes, what are the practices they have developed around, CDR? And then the pandemic hit, basically, and I was not able to go into corporations, and many corporations suggested, okay, we are struggling with, being all virtual. We cannot, give you much access into what we are doing on a daily basis here. So this is where this basically evolved. So I said, it seems that they are very much in the early days of making sense of how to govern responsibility in the digital age. So it makes sense to look at the field level of how these different interactions or actors take place. And this is where I'm at. So I did interviews last year, I did this year, and I will do again basically in the upcoming years to basically trace sort of these developments at the birth of the governance of CDR. So I hope that helps somehow.
All right, Guido, your hand is up.
Yes, yeah, thank you so much, Hannah, for a great overview, and so many things that I've noted in my paper in front of me. I really don't know where to start, but maybe with the really conceptual stuff, the real kind of basic stuff, but maybe also not that basic, because I'm grappling with, and have been grappling with this question: is CDR just an extension of CSR? And also, do the kind of theories that we've developed for CSR stuff just help us there as well? And I'm still looking kind of for this special thing about CDR that really we can also tell the CSR people, hey, this is not the same stuff. There is something additional here. And you've been getting at that a little bit when you said that technology plays a role in itself, is almost like an actor in this. And here, this is where I want to dig deeper, because technology itself, are we talking about the people behind the technology? Are we talking about programmers and all kinds of engineers, essentially professionals or experts? And I think they are also relevant in other fields. Like if you're talking about the natural environment, you have scientists who know about climate, who know about botany, zoology. You have always experts involved in energy experts, and if it's about energy, responsible energy use, and so on. So I think if it would just be a special role of certain experts, that is very interesting, and Max Heimstedt has been studying that kind of stuff in New York, as you know, who counts as an expert for digital technology, and so how is that constructed? Who's allowed to claim expertise? I think it's really exciting, but it's not the most exciting. The more exciting is when the technology, really the machines, become actors. And here we're moving to ANT stuff, materiality stuff, and seriously, this is first time I can actually see that making sense. I mean, the coffee machine over there, to me, doesn't have agency, but AI, and I don't want to get French here, but AI really might change the picture, and the machine really becomes an actor. And this is also, I think, why we do see a very new topic here, and not just a little extension of CSR. And something that really, I don't want to make it too big, but humankind has not had to deal with before. And but now over to you. So you think that this is taking it a little bit too far, or that the technology itself, the machines as actors and people who will also ultimately shape what counts as responsible? That is the ultimate. That the machines tell us what is responsible and what isn't. I mean, is that really going to happen? And does that already bother people that you're talking to?
Thanks for the question. So I think, like, conceptually, theoretically speaking, you're right. I think the advancement of certain technologies is the difference in many ways, and the impact that these technologies can have because the impact is much larger on potentially a large population. So I would say the potential impact on society is becoming much greater with certain technologies, and this is potentially, and they are self-governed in many ways, right? But they're still, and I think there's still no real consensus when we achieve that, but they're very limited technological advances that are so self-developing at this moment that we can say there's no human interaction or surveillance or control over it. I think this is something where we are very much at the edge, basically, but this will become reality in a couple of years. The developments in the technology and the computers is so quickly at this point that we can actually see that there 10 years, 20 years from now, certain technologies will have advanced that much that we won't have potentially the knowledge of what is taking place within them, why do they develop the way they did, and so forth. So I think that's basically, yes, where this is going. But corporate reality, especially in Germany, we're not there. And that's why we see a lot of similarities between the corporate social responsibility and the corporate digital responsibility debate, because simply a little bit of an adoption of the term that shows there's a certain awareness that digital technologies have a certain impact or can have a certain impact, can develop, self-driving cars, for example, and so forth. But we're not there yet at this point. The technological advancement, especially here, is not as advanced, I would say. There are, certain projects, obviously, in the European Union and in Germany that we can think about that, will have a huge or can have a huge impact. But I would say those people, those corporations that I'm dealing with when I'm talking with about corporate digital responsibility, they may have, the development of certain technologies in front of them, or they are currently working on certain technologies, but not in a way that they will easily say, okay, within the next 2 years, we don't know what the technology will do then. There will still be sort of an expert. But I also find interesting to mention is that, all these data scientists, all these information systems people, I think we have a very specific kind of professional, let's say, population in front of us when we talk about these people. And I think this is also something, if you think about clothing development or supply chains, food supply chains and so forth, you have experts that are aware that there's a societal awareness for certain things, for responsibility, for sustainability. And they are usually having, ethical trainings in place and all these things. But for, technology personnel, there's often no ethics treatment training. There's very little understanding of, what are, social responsibility, what is CSR. This is often not part of their training. And I think there it comes in that they have a certain lack of knowledge about these things. And they say, well, I program this one program. I know it can have, difficult implications, but they are often those who just execute something. They're not the ones that, are in charge of deciding things. So I think there is a difference in terms of also awareness for and personal accountability and, ability to engage with responsibility topics within, let's say, data science and people that develop technologies at the moment. But I will say that this doesn't mean that software developer has no conception of right or wrong. I'm completely. I don't think this is also the point. But the point I would say is that bringing together sort of the responsibility of society or for society discourse into the discourse about what softwares do we want to develop. This is something where we're just at the beginning. I think a lot of things are currently developed. And if you look at the startup scene, for example, there's always about what is the next big thing that, breaks the internet, basically. It's not about what saves society. So I think this is something that, I can see definitely in the technology industry being a more prevalent narrative at this point.
Thanks. Yes, thanks.
I think we're such a small group. I don't need to announce everyone. I think you could maybe just unmute yourself and then, yeah.
Then I'll just continue. So first of all, thank you very much for this interesting and exciting presentation. For me, it was an introduction to the topic of CDR. So thank you very much for that. I'd like to subscribe to Guido's argument. I think I also had the feeling that this seems to be like a transmutation, so to say, of CSR to some degree. And I really liked his insight or his suggestions that it comes down to the question of what is the entity that we can ascribe agency to? And as soon as we can ascribe agency to algorithms or to digital entities, then we are in the realm of asking who is responsible for this. And so then I think this whole debate makes sense, and it makes sense to talk about CDR as a discrete and separate topic. So I think in terms of conceptualizing this label, it needs to be really specific in describing what kind of technology needs to be at the basis of this, to not just look like CSR in different terms to some degree. Now, what I would like to learn more about to some degree is when we look at CSR as the counterpart or as the maybe old school version of this, what we learned or what we often see is that regulation is necessary to bring forward action that is not directly consistent with simple activities that result in an economic advantage. As we see with the Lieferkettengesetz in Germany, for example. Have you seen similar moves when it comes to CDR so far? Or what is, for example, on the European level policy that is designed to enshrine CDR?
Yeah.
Or is that so new that we haven't heard of this so far because the EU is too slow to move?
No, I've taken part in a event 3 weeks ago, where exactly this question was asked to one of the state secretaries responsible for the CDR initiative, and he basically said, no, we don't want to regulate at this point, no. We have to make first sense of what is actually the problem here. We have to, all learn about this topic. We have to learn about it. So he was very clear that he didn't want any kind of regulation at this point with regards to CDR. But obviously, the data protection law in Europe is something that many corporations consider as a pretty strong law for responsible activity, safeguarding data of the users in a way. So I think, and actually, there is the story that Mark Zuckerberg actually went to the European Union and asked whether they could, advise them on how to bring the DSVGO to America, because he thought it was a great, invention. And I think at the point where I would say we are not there, that there's any, regulation coming anytime soon for CDR. It will remain sort of a voluntary thing, but we will definitely see, other regulatory efforts in the future with others or more specific, potentially targeted technologies, for example, and the digital EU digital strategy that I alluded to in the beginning. That's something where it's definitely heading towards, but not related to CDR in specific, I would say. But I guess, that will only time will tell whether we can see sort of a mirroring of the CSR movement, so to speak, and the developments we've seen with CSR in the past 30 years or so, whether this will be mirrored with the CDR discourse. And I find it interesting that both of you, and I agree with you that, the agency of the technology is something that is fundamentally different. But the term CDR, if you look at it, it's basically just communicatively puts agency on corporations, not so much the technology. I find that interesting. And that's why it may be that, the discourse and the terms and the debates that, these people use when they talk about CDR is very much similar to CSR. And not so much, more focused on, what is when the technology decides.
I think also that this going all the way to AI immediately is maybe not always helpful, because there are enough open questions and issues just regarding data security, at a very basic level, and data privacy, data security, data usage rights, and so on. There's a lot of basic stuff that needs to be dealt with, regulated, whatever. So maybe also bringing up the scary AI scenarios, it doesn't really help in that respect. But it's connected, because ultimately the big data is used by humans and others, right. So that will be interesting. I wanted to get to the last part of your presentation, or the late part of your presentation, about this, and I really liked your project about bringing together digitalization and sustainability as themes, and really find out how they are connected and how they are connected. And I also think, I like your circles with like the narrower understanding and the broader understanding, and I would translate this as this kind of digitalization for sustainability and the digitalization of sustainability. But if we separate that, then I see also a certain danger, because I think the latter, like the sustainability of digitalization, needs to be really emphasized. And because otherwise, really, digitalization becomes just a technology and just a tool, and not a grand challenge. And I think it is a grand challenge. And first of all, in the kind of provision of access to IT is a grand challenge, but then also the responsible use of IT is a grand challenge. And I would like to see the people clarify up front that we are all in the realm of, let's call it, the 17 SDGs, right? And we have to see how these are connected. For example, one thing you didn't mention, or you mentioned almost everything, is the energy consumption related to digital technology. And so the energy challenges and the digital are also related in this way. At the same time, you can use digital technology to manage energy better, so that not as much electric energy is wasted and so on. So, but my question to you, because we always have to end on a question and not just to make a comment, is is it realistic that we can frame all of these discussions under, let's say, the SDG framework, so that people don't misunderstand what really the challenge is, and that they think that if it's enough to talk about how digitalization can help, you know, to deal with the other SDGs, and where it is a grand challenge in itself.
Ooh, good question. So I think I definitely spared out this whole debate about digitalization, the sustainability of digitalization. You're completely right. But I think, yes, I mean, obviously, digitalization shouldn't be serving itself, right? It should serve to a certain goal, and that's something that should be, you know, at the forefront of everything that we develop. Is, you know, does this help us to advance, or does this help us to, you know, advance the problem in a way? And I guess basically, is this helping us to tackle a grand challenge, or is it, you know, hindering us and even, you know, reinforcing the grand challenge of sustainability overall? And I think this is something that, you know, especially these practitioners alluded to when they said, you know, digitalization should serve corporate sustainability. The question is, how can we make corporate systems more sustainable through the use of digital technologies? But obviously, you know, the whole, you know, sustainability impact of digitalization is something that is increasingly important, given, you know, we replace our phones every, I don't know, 2 years, I think, on an average. I have my very old school one for a couple of years now, but, you know, all these things create a lot of garbage, basically, right? And supercomputing, the servers, the energy that these technologies need to bring us forward, that's a huge impact, obviously, on society as well. So I think we have to consider this and, you know, put up front that this is actually where we can only talk about digitalization if it serves our, you know, aims to reach the SDGs. And if you want to learn about, you know, if you want to learn about data and the relationship with sustainability, I put you in here a nice link to our open access classroom on data and organizations, where we have different topics where we, you know, discuss all kinds related, or all phenomena relating to datafication. So if you're interested in data and organizations, then this may be a good source for you to learn about these things.
Thank you. And I actually have a question myself as well. But before that, I would like to underline the agency argument as well, because that's actually the topic that I'm most interested in at the moment as well. Because I think that over the explainability of autonomous agents, you can definitely limit or also extend the agency of the human, and therefore limit the agency of the machine. But that's actually not my question, because I wanted to come to another point as well. And that is the point of trust, because I hear it everywhere that we need trust for digital technologies. But when I looked into the issue further, I had a feeling that the studies always try to increase trust with increasing transparency and increasing explainability. And if we do that and we give the user more choices and more options and more explanations, don't we really increase the control over the digital technology? And then in the end, we don't really have a trust. But Guido probably has more thoughts on that, because he's the expert. But in essence, don't we really want to, I think we really want to increase control, and the control for the user. And then if the user sees that there is control, then the trust in the company increases, and not really the trust in the technology. That was my thought on that. Maybe what's your thought on that?
I'm not sure if I completely understood it. You mean that users, we don't want to create trust, but we want to create control first? Yeah, well, exactly. I think that goes I mean, isn't that the same? I mean, do I find it, I mean, first of all, I think, I mean, obviously we all know these cookie banners at this point, right? So they tell us here, so put in here, or you make us, or you allow us to collect your data at this point when you enter the web page. And what do? We press yes, most of us, because we want to access the homepage. And you know, they usually give us, now they have to give us the option to say no, only essential stuff. But I think a lot of people still, you know, don't want to go around and say, okay, I have to first, you know, search for that second button. It's often a little bit, you know, grayish at the back, or, you know, somewhere on the sides and all these things. And I'm not sure if this is actually, you know, I mean, there are multiple things. I mean, we want to have quick information. We want to have convenient services. And that somehow often contradicts a little bit the control, right? So I want to basically trust that, you know, there is a setup where I don't need to take control that much, because it's already controlled for me from others. So I think in terms of especially digital services, I can assume that, and I think Tina also alluded to this, you know, dependence, and we are, you know, want to have these technologies in our lives, and we want them to serve us, you know, a certain purpose. But we want to trust that, you know, they basically act in alliance with the legal standards. We want that someone has made up their mind. Okay, I think, you know, in the digital context in Germany, the same principles, democratic principles, should act as, you know, as we would need in real person. And I would expect that to take place, but it doesn't. So we have to, you know, first, I think, create mechanisms besides the individual that helps the individual to feel safe. But then there's another issue. Obviously, we have to train us as civil society members that we have to become more aware of these practices, and have to, you know, also realize, is the convenience worth my data? I mean, that's at the moment the point, right? So at the moment we pay with, basically for convenience, we pay with our individual identity, with our data, with our, you know, behavioral data. And this is, I think, something we are not even aware of. And it's very interesting. My aunt, I told my aunt that, you know, she's a couple of years older as me, and I told her, oh, well, I'm now doing the ethics certificate. And she said, well, do you think this is useful? Because, I mean, wouldn't this be more useful for teaching students or younger people? Or I think maybe they don't even need it anymore, because they're all digital natives. And I said, well, they're digital natives, I think. And we all, you know, even if you're older, you're not very comfortable with using digital technologies, but that doesn't mean that you're ethically trained, or that you are reflective of what you do in the digital context. And I think this is something that we all have to work on, that we have to think about, is the convenience worth that I put in my data there? Is this where I want this to be? And I think this is potentially then on the individual level something.
Now, since the word trust has maybe mentioned so many times.
Yeah, go ahead, Guido, because I'm not a trust expert. But
I don't want to give a 1-hour lecture now, but basically the word is used very loosely. And we have to really listen carefully what people actually mean. And very often people actually mean reliability and accountability. They want to be sure 100% if possible that nothing will go wrong. And if it does, they will get their money back and somebody will be held accountable. And that's what people want. So they don't want to trust. They want to be sure. Yeah, because trust is about the part that you cannot be sure about, and about the part that is you know, uncontrollable, but nevertheless you can develop in a relationship a sense that the other side is not going to be opportunistic, is not going to abuse this, but actually use it constructively in relationship with you. And so there needs to be some kind of relationship, there needs to be some kind of choice on the other side. And so that is why it's so difficult for a trust researcher to accept that we can even talk about trust in technology, because I don't want to have a relationship with my car. I just want it to run, and I don't want anything to break down while I'm driving. And I don't want to have to trust it in the sense of a social relationship where the car takes my my well-being into account when it makes its own decisions. I don't want that kind of relationship with my phone either, or with any technology that I use. And so that is why, if at all, but this is of course a broad literature too, we are talking about indirect trust relationships in the developers, in the companies that offer such products and that give a warranty that they won't break down. And their trust makes sense because here there may be some things happen unexpectedly, and then you can negotiate who's going to pay for it, who's going to repair it, and so on. And this is where trust happens, where you feel that although there's uncertainty, if it comes to it, you won't be let down. And so we have to be very careful. And a lot of people, also in politics in particular, when they say we have to rebuild trust, they usually actually mean we have to increase control. And trust and control go together, but they are not the same. But people call for transparency. Transparency is very double-edged sword. It's especially if you force it. The people are going to cheat even more if you force them to show something. So that is the whole trust can of worms that is lurking there when you mention the term. But I'd be very interested in seeing how people actually use it in your interviews and in your workshops. And if one can actually get a sense of they are actually talking about control here, but they use the word trust, or they are aware that there will always be this little gap that we still have to cross where we can't control things and we have to rely that people are responsible. And trust is about expecting the other side to be responsible and taking responsibility yourself. And unless we can construct that kind of relationship, maybe it's even the wrong word, I think.
Yeah, I think this is really spot on. And I think this whole, what I showed that the EU wants to create trust in digital technologies is exactly this. They want to manage expectations, right? They want to create an environment where users have a certain expectation that is met. And I think that's basically where sort of the governance or the public regulation will go to say, okay, how do we create sort of an environment in Europe where people, expect there will be taken, our data will be taken into account or will be used in this way, but not in the other way. And I think this is something where the CDR discourse potentially, could help.
And part of this, actually, if you take it seriously, is also to make the citizens or consumers aware that they also have to do their part, and that they have to be responsible and reliable, and that they have to help that things are actually working and not breaking down. And but that is very difficult to regulate. But it is in generally consumer protection law, of course. I mean, we hear these crazy stories about the United States where people do stupid things and they even get a recompensation for it. But of course, in Europe, users also have to be responsible to some degree, to a reasonable degree, reasonable to a reasonable degree.
Yeah, it's actually in Bavaria, a lot of these CDR initiatives are driven by the Verbraucherschutzministerium. Yeah. So I think that's where this is actually, taking place. It's about, making sure that consumers feel safe when, they purchase stuff and all these things.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I'm just aware of the time now. So Melissa, I think I'll just thank you for sharing and keeping an eye on the speakers list. But we would have time for another question or comment. So looking at our other participants today, just to see if somebody has another question. Yes, Sabrina, please.
Yes, hi. Thank you for your presentation. I have a question with regard to the trust issue. I think we have the idea that people trust technology and that they want to keep their privacy safe, but I think a lot of people are just rather careless about it. And to build trust, they need to know the risk. And I think a lot of people really don't think a lot about the risks they have when they accept the cookies carelessly. Just to be convenient. I think there is maybe an educational problem. And you said that in Bavaria, the Verbraucherschutz is mostly pushing it forward, but I think there's a problem maybe that the Verbraucher or the consumer is the one who needs someone who take care of them, because they rather don't think a lot of the risk and trust too easy, or even I'm not sure if they even really trust, or just use it without thinking that it might be really harm for them when they use it.
That's good, but that's what I mean with, which I find interesting, that the Verbraucherschutzministerium is taking over CDR. So they're making, or they engage in activities with corporations, but they should be the Verbraucherschutz, or they are the Verbraucherschutzministerium. You would assume that they would work with consumer representatives, right? But they don't. They do, but they also engage with corporations, because they exactly say that the same. They say we have to create services that safeguard consumers, and that we have to make sure that they face an infrastructure that is provided by corporations that they can trust. So that's basically, and that's maybe, and unfortunately, Leona has now left, which I find interesting, that now political parties that are actually, or should, be very much involved with the consumers, are also now looking at corporations and saying, okay, consumer, they are obviously, we need more further education, we need to train people, civil society needs to develop further awareness for these issues, but until then we need to make sure that there is an infrastructure that helps our consumers to make the right choices and to be in control, to be transparent and so forth. And that's why they work with the corporations. And I think that's actually very smart to say, we kind of support consumers by working with corporations to make sure that we develop that the corporations develop services and products that serve consumers rather than harm them.
Are there any developments ongoing where they really try to focus on the consumer to educate them?
So yeah, I mean, it's difficult to say. It depends. I mean, we have a whole civil society sector, right? So we have, for example, the Bertelsmann Stiftung doing a lot at the moment with regards to responsibility in the digital age. We can see that there are a lot of efforts, but they're all very patched, I would say. I mean, there was a talk about a political, what's it called, Bundeszentrale für politische Bildung, to create something equal for the digital transformation, but it hasn't materialized. So,
and it's a tricky field too. I mean, let's I'm sorry, I'm trying to bring it to a close now, but I think we kind of started with cookies, and it would be nice to have some cookies now, actually. And maybe we can also end on cookies, because cookies are not evil per se. Our university uses cookies when people visit our website. So do you think the university is going to harm all of those people who visit our website seriously? And it is kind of, this conspiracy theory sometimes also, that this data that is collected will be used against you, but it could be used against you. And I think that makes a big difference, that it could be used by some malevolent actors against us, but the ones who collecting it are maybe not the ones who are going to use it against us. And so the cookie as such is not evil, but again, the actors are evil or not. And so we end up with the social relationship after all, and it's technologically mediated. So, and that's why it's difficult also to educate people. Should you tell your children not to use cookies? Well, I can tell them not to use hard drugs, but not to use cookies is not good advice, So it is very interesting, and I think, but I think also with other technologies, it's also a matter of using them, and if you don't have bad experiences, you will continue using them. If you start having bad experiences, you will get more careful and stop, but hopefully not at a point when you've already lost all your money. Anyway, so thank you so much, Anna. It's been exciting discussion, and everybody who was here, I'm sure, learned a lot and could reflect a lot on their own use and their own responsibility in using data, and also what kind of expectations we can have of corporations, and to what extent, whenever we talk about responsible entrepreneurship, responsible management, this part has to be mentioned for sure and has to be included in people's thinking. So thank you so much. And the semesters in Germany are almost over. I don't know what it's like at Leuphana, but we're kind of finishing on some sort of hybrid mode at the moment here in Witten. One more week to go, and that's why I want to wish everybody already a great summer, a nice vacation if you can have one, and hope to see you again soon in a meeting like this, or maybe offline. That would be nice. So thanks again, Hannah. It was wonderful. Thank you, Melissa, and everybody.
Thanks for the invite.
Contributing. Thanks so much. Goodbye.
It's a pleasure.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.